Emily Brooks had always been the kind of person who got excited about things most people found boring. While other kids dreamed of becoming astronauts or soldiers, she wanted to study alien slugs. Her dorm room back on Earth had been covered with posters of bizarre creatures from distant worlds, and her classmates had called her obsessive. She didn't care. To her, every new planet was a treasure chest of biological mysteries waiting to be unlocked. That's how she ended up on Nova Terra, a frontier colony at the edge of explored space. The pay was terrible, the food was worse, and the isolation drove most researchers back to Earth within 6 months. But Emily had signed up for a 3-year stint without hesitation. This planet had ecosystems that defied everything scientists thought they knew about life. The plants here grew crystals instead of leaves, and some of the local fauna could phase through solid matter. It was paradise for someone like her. On that particular morning, Emily was 7 kilometers from the main research station, carefully collecting samples of luminescent moss that grew only in the shadow zones of the crystal forests. Her supervisor had told her to take someone with her, but Emily hated working with partners. They always talked too much and scared away the interesting specimens. So she'd lied and said her partner was running late, then headed out alone with her field kit and tablet. The binary suns were at their peak, casting double shadows across the alien landscape. Emily hummed tunelessly as she worked, scraping moss samples into sealed containers and making notes on her tablet. She was so focused that she almost missed the sound. A low rumbling, like distant thunder, but the sky was clear. She paused, listening. There it was again, closer this time. Not thunder. Something breathing. Emily stood slowly, her heart suddenly pounding. The crystal trees around her were easily 20 meters tall, but something massive moved between them ahead. She caught a glimpse of scales, iridescent and shimmering with light that seemed to come from within. Her scientific brain catalogued details automatically. Bipedal stance. Quadrupedal movement. Wings folded against its back. Estimated mass at least 5 tons. It was a dragon. Or something so close to the dragons from Earth legends that the resemblance was impossible to ignore. Every survival instinct Emily possessed screamed at her to run. This was clearly an apex predator, and she was completely unarmed. The colony's defensive perimeter was kilometers away. She'd never make it. But she didn't run. She couldn't. Because as the creature emerged fully from between the crystal trees, she saw it was limping badly, favoring its right foreclaw. The dragon stopped about 30 meters away, its massive head swinging toward her. Eyes like molten gold fixed on her small human form. Emily felt her bladder threaten to let go, but she forced herself to stay still. Predators chased running prey. That was biology 101, even across species. The creature made a sound, lower and more complex than before. Not aggressive. Almost questioning. It took a step toward her, and Emily saw the problem clearly now. Something was embedded in its right foreclaw, a jagged piece of metal about the size of her forearm. The flesh around it was discolored, oozing a fluid that steamed when it hit the ground. The dragon was in agony. Emily's fear didn't disappear, but something else rose up alongside it. Curiosity. Professional interest. And something softer that she'd feel embarrassed to name out loud. This magnificent creature was suffering, and she might be able to help. She moved before she could talk herself out of it. Slowly, carefully, keeping her movements deliberate and non-threatening. She pulled out her tablet and activated the translation software, setting it to broadcast harmonic frequencies that most carbon-based life forms found soothing. She didn't expect it to actually communicate, but maybe the sound would calm the creature. "It's okay," she said softly, her voice shaking. "I want to help. I'm not going to hurt you." The dragon's head tilted, watching her approach. It could kill her in a heartbeat. One swipe of those claws, one blast of whatever energy weapon it clearly possessed based on the heat shimmer around its throat. But it stayed still. Emily knelt beside the massive foreclaw when she finally reached it. Up close, the dragon was even more incredible. Its scales weren't just reflective, they generated their own bioluminescence in patterns that shifted like auroras. The metal spike embedded in its flesh was clearly artificial, covered in strange markings. Some kind of projectile weapon, maybe. "This is going to hurt," Emily whispered, more to herself than the dragon. Her field kit wasn't designed for surgery. She had sample collection tools, a basic first aid pack, and not much else. But she had steady hands and years of dissection training. She pulled out her extraction forceps, the ones she used for removing mineral samples from rock faces. The dragon's blood hissed against the metal, acidic and burning. Emily's gloves began to smoke, but she gritted her teeth and worked the spike back and forth, loosening it from the flesh. The dragon made no sound, but she felt its entire body tense with pain. "Almost there," she muttered. "Come on, come on." The spike came free with a wet sound that made Emily's stomach turn. The dragon's blood was eating through her gloves now, burning her fingers, but she dropped the spike and grabbed her emergency medical supplies. The bandages were designed for human injuries, but they were impregnated with universal coagulants that worked on most organic tissue. She wrapped the wound as tightly as she dared, using the entire contents of her first aid kit. When she finished, she stumbled backward, cradling her burned hands. The dragon lifted its foreclaw, examining her work. Then its head lowered until those massive golden eyes were level with hers, just centimeters away. Emily forgot to breathe. The sound it made was different now. Softer. Almost gentle. Then its wings unfurled, massive and terrifying and beautiful, blotting out both suns. The downward thrust of air knocked Emily flat as the dragon launched itself skyward. She lay in the moss, watching it disappear into the violet clouds, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break her ribs. Only then did she start shaking. Only then did the reality of what she'd just done hit her. She just performed field surgery on an unknown alien apex predator. She could have died. Should have died. But something about that moment, kneeling beside a creature of myth made real, had felt more right than anything else in her entire life. Emily gathered her scattered equipment with trembling hands and began the long walk back to the research station. She had no idea that her life had just changed forever. That the creature she'd helped would return. That her simple act of compassion would spark a chain of events that would reshape humanity's place in the galaxy. She just knew that her hands hurt, her samples were ruined, and she had the most incredible story that absolutely no one would ever believe. Emily didn't tell anyone about the dragon. Who would believe her anyway? She'd sound like someone who'd been out in the sun too long or had accidentally inhaled some of the planet's hallucinogenic spores. So she treated her burned hands in her quarters, made up a story about a lab accident, and tried to get back to her normal routine. Except nothing felt normal anymore. The first gift appeared 3 days later. Emily woke up to find a chunk of crystallized mineral sitting outside her door. It was roughly the size of a basketball, deep purple with veins of silver running through it, and it pulsed with a faint internal light. She picked it up carefully and nearly dropped it when she realized what she was holding. Compressed neutronium crystal. The stuff was rarer than diamonds and worth more than her entire research station. A single gram could power the colony for a month. She reported it to her supervisor, a tired man named Dr. Phillips who'd been on Nova Terra so long he'd forgotten what real coffee tasted like. He took one look at the crystal and his eyes went wide. "Where did you find this?" "Outside my door this morning," Emily said truthfully. "Outside your door? Brooks, do you have any idea what this is worth?" "Someone probably stole it from the Geological Survey team." But the Geological Survey team had no idea where it came from. Neither did security. The surveillance cameras showed nothing. One frame showed an empty hallway, the next frame showed the crystal sitting there. No one coming or going. Like it had materialized out of thin air. More gifts followed. A cluster of flowers that shouldn't exist on this planet, their petals made of what looked like spun glass. Seeds from a tree species that had been declared extinct 30 years ago. A piece of technology so advanced that the engineering team couldn't even figure out what it was supposed to do. They all appeared outside Emily's quarters, always when the cameras weren't looking. Emily started having dreams. Not nightmares exactly, but intense visions of flying through storm clouds, of hunting across alien landscapes, of resting in caves filled with treasures. She'd wake up feeling like she'd actually been somewhere else, her muscles sore as if she'd really been flying. Her research started advancing in ways that made no sense. Plants that had refused to grow in the lab suddenly flourished the moment she touched them. Alien specimens that had been biological mysteries for years seemed to open themselves to her understanding, as if they were teaching her their secrets directly. Within 2 weeks, Emily had made more progress than the entire research team had made in 2 years. The other scientists noticed. Of course they noticed. Dr. Rachel Martinez, who'd been competing with Emily for a grant, started making snide comments about sudden breakthroughs and suspicious timing. James Peterson, the senior xenobotanist, accused her of stealing his research. Even Dr. Phillips started looking at her strangely, like he couldn't quite figure out what had changed but knew something had. Emily couldn't explain it. She just knew that when she looked at alien life forms now, she understood them in ways that went beyond science. Like she could feel their biological patterns, sense their evolutionary purpose. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Then the Krell came. The alarms woke everyone at 2 a.m. Emily stumbled out of bed, her mind foggy with sleep, and checked her tablet. The message was simple and horrifying: colony under attack. All personnel to designated shelters immediately. The Krell had been harassing human colonies for months, but they'd never hit Nova Terra before. They were insectoid nightmares, each one the size of a ground car, with mandibles that could shear through steel and acid that dissolved flesh on contact. They'd been pushing humanity back across 3 star systems, and no one knew why they were so aggressive or what they wanted. Emily ran for the nearest shelter with everyone else, but panic made people stupid. Someone shoved her in the crush of bodies, and she went down hard. By the time she got back to her feet, the main group had pulled ahead, and she'd taken a wrong turn in the dark. The colony's emergency lighting cast everything in red shadows that made it impossible to tell corridors apart. She heard them before she saw them. A clicking sound, like stones rattling in a jar, but amplified and wrong. Emily pressed herself against the wall, trying not to breathe. 3 Krell rounded the corner, their multifaceted eyes reflecting the red light. They moved with horrible grace, segmented legs carrying them silently despite their size. They saw her immediately. One of them made a sound like breaking glass, and all 3 turned in her direction. Emily ran. She didn't think about it, didn't plan a route, just ran blindly down the corridor. Her lungs burned. Her legs felt like rubber. Behind her, the clicking grew louder as they gained ground. She hit a dead end. A storage bay with only one entrance, and she just trapped herself in it. Emily spun around, grabbing the first thing she could find as a weapon. A piece of pipe, maybe half a meter long. Useless against creatures that could tear through blast doors. The Krell entered the storage bay, spreading out to surround her. Their mandibles clicked in what might have been laughter. The closest one reared up, acid dripping from its mouthparts, and Emily knew she was about to die. She raised the pipe anyway, determined to at least fight back. The roof exploded. Debris rained down as a massive shape descended through the torn metal. Emily's dragon, scales blazing with bioluminescence bright enough to hurt her eyes, landed between her and the Krell with an impact that shook the entire building. It was bigger than she remembered, or maybe just more terrifying when it was angry. The dragon made a sound that wasn't quite a roar. It was deeper, more complex, like a song made of rage and power. The Krell froze for one heartbeat, then attacked. They never stood a chance. What happened next was less a fight and more a demonstration of the difference between predator and prey. The dragon moved with impossible speed for something so large, its claws tearing through Krell armor like it was paper. When one of them tried to spray acid, the dragon's throat glowed and it breathed something that looked like concentrated starlight. The Krell and part of the wall behind it simply ceased to exist, vaporized in an instant. The other 2 Krell tried to flee. The dragon was faster. Within seconds, all 3 were dead, their bodies smoking and broken. Then the dragon turned to Emily, and she saw something she hadn't seen before. On its chest, right above where its heart would be if it had a heart in the human sense, there was a mark. A glowing sigil that pulsed with gentle light. As she watched, the same mark appeared on her right wrist, burning itself into her skin with no pain at all. The dragon lowered its head, and Emily reached out without thinking. Her hand touched its scaled snout, and the world tilted. Images flooded her mind. Emotions that weren't hers. A sense of connection so profound it made her gasp. She understood in that moment that the gifts hadn't been random. The dragon had been watching over her, protecting her, preparing her for something. Security teams arrived to find Emily Brooks standing in a destroyed storage bay, surrounded by dead Krell, with an alien dragon the size of a small building positioned protectively over her. The dragon made no aggressive moves, just watched the humans with those golden eyes until reinforcements arrived and Emily was safely surrounded by armed personnel. Then it launched itself through the hole it had made in the roof and vanished into the night sky. Emily looked down at the mark on her wrist. It was beautiful, intricate, and permanent. She had no idea what it meant, but she knew with absolute certainty that her quiet life as a research scientist was over. The dragon had claimed her as something important, something precious, and that changed everything. She just didn't know yet how much everything had changed, or that the entire human race's future might rest on the connection between a nerdy xenobiology student and an ancient alien creature who decided she was worth saving. The colony commander wanted answers Emily didn't have. Colonel Hayes was a career military officer who'd seen action in 3 different conflicts, and he wasn't the type to accept mystery as an explanation. Emily sat across from him in his office while he stared at the surveillance footage of her dragon tearing through 3 Krell like they were made of tissue paper. "Explain this to me one more time, Brooks. You just happened to be in that storage bay, and this creature just happened to show up at exactly the right moment to save you." Emily touched the mark on her wrist unconsciously. It had stopped glowing, but she could still feel it, warm against her skin like a constant reminder. I don't know what else to tell you, sir. I helped it once. Maybe it was returning the favor. Helped it how? It was injured. I removed something that was hurting it. Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying her with eyes that had interrogated enemy combatants and lying soldiers. And now you have that mark. What does it mean? I don't know. Can you control it? Call it back. No, sir. I don't think so. You don't think so, or you won't. Emily met his gaze steadily. I don't know how any of this works. I'm a xenobiology student, not some kind of dragon whisperer. But that wasn't entirely true anymore. Over the next few days, Emily realized the mark was more than decorative. She could feel something through it, a presence at the edge of her awareness. Like knowing someone was standing behind you without turning around. And her dreams got more intense, more specific. She dreamed of vast cities that existed in spaces between dimensions, of battles fought across time streams, of a species so old they remembered when galaxies were young. The dragon returned 5 days after the attack. This time it landed deliberately in the open area outside the colony's main building, in broad daylight where everyone could see. It settled onto the ground with its wings folded, making no aggressive moves, and waited. The entire colony went on alert. Automated defense systems tracked it but didn't fire. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath. Emily felt a pull, undeniable and clear. The dragon wanted her to come outside. Colonel Hayes tried to stop her, but Emily pushed past him. She was done being afraid. Whatever was happening, she needed to understand it. She walked out into the open area alone while hundreds of colonists watched from windows and doorways. The dragon's golden eyes tracked her approach, and she felt something shift in her mind. Not words exactly, but concepts. Understanding that flowed directly from the dragon into her consciousness. His name was Tharos, though that wasn't quite right. It was more like a harmonic frequency that meant guardian of lost wisdom or keeper of ancient flames, or maybe both at once. Human language didn't have the depth to properly translate it. He belonged to a species called the Drakhtha, and they were older than human civilization by thousands of years. Emily's legs gave out and she sat down hard on the ground as information poured into her mind. The Drakhtha had once ruled this entire sector of space, not through conquest but through natural dominance. They were beings that existed partially outside normal reality, able to shift between dimensions, manipulate energy at fundamental levels, and live for millennia. But something had hunted them, driven them nearly to extinction, forced them to retreat into hidden spaces where they slowly faded from the galaxy's memory. The thing she'd removed from Tharos's claw hadn't been random debris. It was a bioweapon, specifically designed to exploit the one weakness the Drakhtha had. It was slowly poisoning him, breaking down the barrier between dimensions that let his species exist. If Emily hadn't removed it, Tharos would have died slowly and painfully over the course of months. The Krell served something worse. Something that existed in the spaces between stars, a parasitic intelligence that consumed entire civilizations. The Krell called it the Void Swarm, and it had been hunting the Drakhtha for centuries because the Drakhtha were the only species powerful enough to oppose it. Most humans would have walked past Tharos without stopping. Most would have run in fear. Some might have tried to capture or kill him for study. Emily had done something none of them would have. She'd seen a creature in pain and helped it without thinking about reward or recognition or even her own safety. That act, that simple moment of compassion from a being Tharos could have destroyed with a thought, had proven something to him. Humans were worth saving. Worth protecting. Worth teaching. Through their bond, Tharos began showing Emily things humans had never seen. The mathematical principles that allowed faster-than-light travel without relying on crude jump gates. The biological mechanisms that could extend human lifespans by centuries. Technologies that could terraform dead worlds or harvest energy from stars safely. The Drakhtha had accumulated millions of years of knowledge, and Tharos was offering Emily access to it. But it came with understanding the danger humanity was in. The Void Swarm had noticed humans. Earth's expansion into space, humanity's aggressive colonization, had drawn its attention. The Krell attacks weren't random harassment. They were probing strikes, testing human defenses, gathering data for the swarm. Something massive was coming, something that had destroyed species far more advanced than humanity. Emily stood on shaking legs, her mind reeling from everything she'd learned. Behind her, she heard boots on pavement. Colonel Hayes and his security team, weapons drawn but not aimed. She turned to face them and saw the fear in their eyes. Fear of Tharos. Fear of her. Fear of change. Stand down, she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. He's not a threat. He's trying to help us. Help us how? Hayes demanded. The Krell serve something worse. Something that's coming for all of us. Tharos says his people have been watching humanity for years, waiting to see if we were worth allying with or if we were just another aggressive species that would burn itself out. And what did they decide? Emily looked back at Tharos, feeling the warmth of their connection through the mark. That one human showing compassion to a suffering creature was enough to give humanity a chance. But we have to prove we deserve it. Hayes lowered his weapon slowly. What does that mean? It means the colony brass are going to want to study him. Weaponize the connection. Use it for military advantage. Emily's jaw tightened. And if we do that, if we treat this like just another resource to exploit, the Drakthar will leave us to face what's coming alone. And we'll lose. Badly. Over the next week, everything Emily had feared came true. Word spread fast through military channels. High-ranking officers arrived from off-world, scientists with clearance levels above her pay grade, intelligence analysts who looked at Tharos like he was a puzzle to be solved. They wanted Emily to broker meetings, establish communication protocols, convince Tharos to share technology and tactical information. Emily found herself in the impossible position of being humanity's accidental ambassador to a species that could crush the entire colony without effort. She was 26 years old, she had student debt she'd probably never pay off, and her biggest accomplishment before this had been successfully breeding a hybrid plant that glowed in the dark. Now she had to somehow explain to military commanders why they couldn't just take what they wanted. Why respect and genuine alliance mattered more than short-term advantage. Why one human showing basic decency to an alien in pain might be the only thing standing between humanity and extinction. Tharos remained patient through it all, watching the humans scramble and argue and make demands. But Emily felt his disappointment growing. Felt other presences at the edge of her awareness, other Drakthar watching from whatever hidden spaces they inhabited. They were judging humanity based on what they saw here, and humanity wasn't impressing them. Emily stood in another meeting, listening to another general explain why they needed to secure the asset and maximize strategic advantage, and she finally snapped. He's not an asset. His name is Tharos, he's older than human civilization, and he's offering us help we desperately need. But if we treat him like a weapon instead of an ally, he'll leave. They'll all leave. And when the Void Swarm arrives, we'll face it alone with our primitive technology and our arrogant attitudes, and we'll die. Is that what you want? The room went silent. The general stared at her like she'd grown a second head. But outside, through the window, Emily saw Tharos lift his head. Felt approval flowing through their bond. She'd just gambled everything on the belief that compassion mattered more than conquest. Now she'd find out if humanity was capable of learning that lesson before it was too late. The warnings came 3 weeks after Emily's outburst in the meeting. Tharos had been visiting the colony regularly, and through their bond, Emily had learned to understand the complex emotions and concepts the Drakthar communicated. What she felt that morning made her blood run cold. Danger. Massive threat approaching. Many enemies coming. She ran to find Colonel Hayes, still in her pajamas, her hair a mess. They're coming. The Krell. A lot of them. Hayes looked up from his morning coffee. How do you know? Tharos told me. Through this. She held up her marked wrist. A fleet. Bigger than anything they've sent before. They're not here to raid anymore. They want to wipe us out completely. Hayes set down his coffee carefully. When? 2 days. Maybe less. The colony went into emergency lockdown. Every defense system was brought online, automated turrets positioned, emergency protocols activated. But everyone who looked at the projections knew the truth. If the Krell came in force, Nova Terra didn't stand a chance. The colony had maybe a dozen military-grade ships, weapons designed to fight off pirates and small raiding parties. Not a full invasion fleet. Emily spent those 2 days trying to convince command to evacuate. Get the civilians out at least, load them onto transport ships and run for the nearest safe harbor. But politics got in the way. Earth's colonial administration didn't want to look weak. Abandoning Nova Terra would send a message that humanity couldn't defend its territory. Better to fight and lose than retreat and look scared. They're going to get everyone killed over pride, Emily told Tharos during one of their meetings. She'd gotten comfortable sitting beside him now, leaning against his massive scaled side while he radiated warmth like a living furnace. I don't know how to make them listen. Tharos's response came as feelings and images. Humans were young, he conveyed. Young species often prioritized appearance over survival. It was a common failing among those who hadn't yet learned the galaxy's harder lessons. Is there anything you can do? You and your people. Another wave of emotion, this one more complex. The Drakthar could help, but they wouldn't fight humanity's battles for them. That wasn't how alliances worked. Humanity had to prove they were worth the cost of alliance, worth the risk of revealing themselves to enemies who'd been hunting the Drakthar for centuries. But Tharos hadn't come alone anymore. Emily had started sensing other presences, other Drakthar watching from whatever dimensional spaces they inhabited. 7 of them had come, drawn by Tharos's reports of the human who'd helped him. 7 ancient beings, each powerful enough to level cities, waiting to see if humanity deserved their intervention. The Krell fleet arrived exactly when Tharos had predicted. 23 ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, and sensors immediately started screaming warnings. It wasn't just their number. These ships were bigger, better armed, and moving with coordinated precision that spoke of serious military planning. Emily stood in the command center with Hayes and his officers, watching the tactical displays update. The math was brutal and simple. The Krell would reach Nova Terra in 6 hours. The colony's defenses might hold them off for maybe 30 minutes before being overwhelmed. After that, it was just a matter of how fast the Krell could kill everyone. We need to evacuate now, Emily said again. While we still have time to get people out. Negative, came a voice from the comm system. Admiral Patterson, commanding from a cruiser in orbit. We hold position and defend the colony. Earth Command's orders. Earth Command isn't here. Emily's voice cracked with frustration. They're not the ones about to die. Stand down, Miss Brooks. This isn't your decision to make. Emily felt Tharos's presence suddenly intensify in her mind. She looked out the window and saw him there, along with the others. 7 massive Drakthar, scales shimmering with different colors, each one radiating power that made the air itself seem to vibrate. They'd been watching from hiding, but now they revealed themselves fully. Through their bond, Tharos sent her a clear message. The Drakthar would offer humanity one choice, delivered through Emily because she was the only human they trusted. Accept true alliance, partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose, or face the Krell alone and learn the consequences of pride. Emily grabbed the comm unit before anyone could stop her. Admiral Patterson, patch me through to all colony frequencies. Everyone needs to hear this. Brooks, you don't have authorization. Do it. Or everyone here dies and it's on you. Something in her voice must have gotten through because after a moment's hesitation, Patterson patched her through. Emily took a deep breath and started talking, knowing thousands of people were listening. My name is Emily Brooks. 3 weeks ago, I helped an injured alien, and that act created a bond between us. His name is Tharos, and he belongs to a species called the Drakthar. They're older and more powerful than anything humans have ever encountered. They've been watching us, deciding if we're worth saving or if we're just another aggressive species that will burn itself out. She paused, gathering her thoughts. The Krell serve something worse. Something called the Void Swarm that destroys entire civilizations. The Drakthar have fought it before, and they're offering to help us fight it now. But only if we prove we're worth the cost. Only if we can learn to be partners instead of conquerors. On the tactical display, the Krell fleet kept advancing. 4 hours now until they arrived. They're giving us a choice. Real alliance based on respect, or face this alone. And I'm telling you right now, if we face this alone, we lose. All of us. The Krell fleet heading our way will tear through our defenses like paper. But if we accept help, if we show we can be humble enough to accept partnership with beings different from us, we might survive this. Admiral Patterson's voice came back, tight with barely controlled anger. You're advocating surrender to alien entities we know nothing about. I'm advocating survival. Emily shot back. I'm advocating learning from species that have existed for millions of years. I'm advocating maybe, just maybe, putting aside our pride and accepting that we don't know everything. Silence on the comm. Emily could almost feel thousands of people processing what she'd said, weighing survival against human pride. Colonel Hayes stepped up beside her, and to her surprise, he took the comm unit. Admiral, this is Hayes. I've been watching these Drakthar for weeks now. Watched them interact with Brooks, seen what they're capable of. If they wanted us dead, we'd already be dead. I recommend we accept their offer. More voices chimed in. Scientists, engineers, civilians who'd been listening. Not everyone agreed, but enough did. Enough understood that pride was a luxury they couldn't afford. Admiral Patterson finally responded, his voice heavy with the weight of command. Ms. Brooks, Tell your dragon we accept alliance. But make it clear this is partnership, not subjugation. Emily felt relief flood through her, and through the bond, she felt Tharos's approval. She walked outside where the 7 Drakthar waited, and spoke loudly enough for her words to be picked up by external microphones. Tharos. Your people. Humanity accepts your offer of alliance. True partnership, based on respect and shared purpose. Will you help us? The answer came not in words but in action. The 7 Drakthar launched themselves skyward, their wings creating sonic booms that rattled windows across the colony. They positioned themselves in orbit, spread out in formation, and waited. The Krell fleet arrived 3 hours later. What happened next wasn't really a battle. It was a demonstration of the difference between species that fought with technology and species that were technology, that existed partially outside reality itself, that wielded power humans had barely begun to understand. The Drakthar moved like living weapons, their bodies generating energy blasts that made human plasma cannons look like firecrackers. They phased through space, appearing and disappearing, tearing through Krell ships with claws that cut through armor like it wasn't there. When Tharos opened his mouth and breathed, entire Krell vessels simply existing, converted to energy and scattered across space. But here was the thing that impressed Emily most. The Drakthar showed restraint. When Krell ships tried to flee, they were allowed to go. When crews evacuated in escape pods, those pods weren't destroyed. The Drakthar were proving a point, not committing genocide. Within an hour, the Krell fleet was shattered. 15 ships destroyed, 8 retreating at maximum speed, and 1 surrendering. That last ship was escorted into orbit by 2 of the Drakthar, its crew alive but disarmed. Emily coordinated with the medical teams, using her xenobiology knowledge to help treat injured Krell. She insisted on it, even though some people called her a traitor. Because if humanity was going to be better, if they were going to deserve the alliance Tharos offered, they had to start by treating even their enemies with basic decency. The Krell admiral was brought down to the colony under guard. He was massive, easily twice Emily's height, mandibles see as he faced the assembled human commanders and the 7 Drakthar who destroyed his fleet. Through a translation device, he spoke. We serve the swarm. We have no choice. It took our world, infected our species, turned us into slaves. We raid because it commands us to raid. We kill because it commands us to kill. Emily felt sick. The Krell weren't evil conquerors. They were victims, enslaved by something worse. Tharos communicated directly through Emily, his thoughts becoming her words. The Void Swarm. An ancient enemy we thought destroyed millennia ago. It's awakened, and it's spreading again. The Krell are just the first wave. More will come. The Admiral confirmed it. The swarm had infected dozens of species, turning them into weapons. It fed on fear and conflict, growing stronger with each civilization it destroyed. And it had noticed humanity's expansion into space. How do we fight something like that? Colonel Hayes asked. Emily looked at Tharos, then at the assembled humans and Krell, and something clicked in her mind. We don't fight it alone. We build an alliance. Humans, Drakthar, and Krell. Anyone who wants to be free. We prove that cooperation is stronger than slavery. It was naive, maybe. Idealistic, definitely. But as Emily spoke, she felt approval flowing through her bond with Tharos. Felt the other Drakthar's attention focusing on her with something that might have been hope. Humanity had passed the first test. Now came the harder part, proving they could maintain that cooperation when the real war began. Emily Brooks was no longer just a xenobiology student. That identity felt like it belonged to someone else, someone from a different lifetime. The nervous girl who'd been excited about collecting moss samples had been transformed by events she never could have imagined. She stood in front of a mirror in her quarters, staring at the changes. Her eyes had flecks of gold in them now that hadn't been there before. The mark on her wrist had grown, spreading up her forearm in intricate patterns that glowed faintly when Tharos was near. She could sense energy fields around living things, see patterns in reality that humans weren't supposed to perceive. She was becoming something new. Still human, still herself, but also something more. The bond with Tharos had changed her on a fundamental level, unlocking potential that had always been there but dormant. She could partially shift between dimensions now, her hand passing through solid objects when she concentrated. She could perceive time differently, seeing probability streams branching out from each decision. The Drakthar's knowledge flowed through her mind, millions of years of accumulated wisdom suddenly accessible. It was overwhelming. Some nights she woke up crying because her brain couldn't process everything she was experiencing. But Tharos was always there, a steady presence in her mind, helping her adapt. teaching her how to filter the information, how to stay grounded in her humanity while accessing abilities that went far beyond human limitations. The colony had transformed too. What had been a struggling research outpost was now the epicenter of something unprecedented. The Unity Accord, as Emily had named it, was taking shape. Humans, Draktha, and freed Krell working together, building something that had never existed before. A true multi-species alliance based on mutual respect rather than dominance or fear. It wasn't easy. Old prejudices died hard. Some humans couldn't look at the Krell without seeing monsters who'd killed their friends during the raids. Some Krell couldn't trust humans after years of being forced to fight them. Arguments broke out constantly. Fights occasionally. Emily found herself mediating disputes between species, using her connection to Theros to bridge communication gaps that translation software couldn't handle. She'd become a diplomat without any training, relying on instinct and genuine care for all parties involved. When a human engineer refused to work with a Krell technician, Emily sat them both down and made them talk about their fears. When a group of Krell started self-segregating because they felt unwelcome, Emily organized a shared meal where everyone contributed food from their homeworlds. Small gestures, but they added up. More Draktha emerged from hiding as word spread. Ancient beings who'd been living in dimensional pockets, hiding from the Void Swarm, started revealing themselves. They were cautious, still uncertain about humanity, but Theros vouched for them. Told stories of the human who'd helped him when she had no reason to, who'd risked everything to build bridges instead of walls. Emily met with them all, and each encounter was humbling. She spoke with Valara, a Draktha who'd witnessed the birth of 3 galaxies. With Karath, who'd fought in wars before Earth's sun ignited. With Mirith, who'd been alive when the Void Swarm first appeared and remembered the civilizations it had destroyed. They were beings of immense power and knowledge, and they treated Emily with respect that made her uncomfortable. She was just a girl who'd pulled a spike out of an injured creature's paw. She didn't feel like she deserved their reverence. But Theros helped her understand. She represented something the Draktha had been searching for across millions of years. Proof that young species could learn compassion before conquest, cooperation before domination. Most species didn't. Most burned bright and fast, destroying themselves or others before they matured. Humanity was showing signs of being different, and Emily was the living symbol of that potential. The technologies started flowing. Not weapons, despite what the military brass kept requesting. The Draktha gave humanity tools for building instead of destroying. Methods for sustainable energy harvesting that could power entire planets. Medical knowledge that could extend human lifespans by centuries. Agricultural techniques that could terraform dead worlds and make them bloom with life. Engineering principles that made faster-than-light travel safer and more efficient. Emily worked with teams of scientists, translating Draktha concepts into terms humans could understand. It was exhausting work. The knowledge was so advanced that even explaining basic principles required hours of discussion. She'd spend entire days helping engineers understand a single piece of technology, then collapse in her quarters too tired to even eat. But it was worth it. She watched Nova Terra transform from a struggling colony into a hub of innovation. New buildings rose, constructed with materials that could self-repair and adapt to environmental changes. Gardens flourished with hybrid plants that combined Earth and alien species. Medical facilities treated injuries and illnesses that would have been death sentences just months before. The freed Krell contributed too. Their natural ability to work in hive mind coordination made them incredible builders and organizers. They shared their own technologies, things they developed before the swarm enslaved them. Biotechnology that could grow living structures. Neural networks that enhanced group communication. Art forms that humans had never imagined. Sculptures that existed in 4 dimensions and paintings that changed based on the viewer's emotional state. Emily walked through the colony 6 months after everything had changed, barely recognizing it. Human children played with young Krell, laughing at each other's games despite not speaking the same language. Draktha elders taught human students about the fundamental nature of reality. Engineers from 3 species collaborated on projects that would have been impossible for any single group. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems, still conflicts, still people on all sides who couldn't let go of old hatreds. But it was working. They were building something that mattered. Earth's government took notice. Emily received a summons to address the United Earth Assembly, the governing body that represented all of humanity's colonies and interests. She'd be speaking via quantum transmission, her image projected into the assembly hall on Earth itself. Billions would be watching. She was terrified. Public speaking had never been her strength. She'd spent her whole academic career avoiding presentations when she could. And now she was supposed to address the entire human race and explain why everything they thought they knew about humanity's place in the galaxy was wrong. Tharos sensed her fear and sent reassurance through their bond. She wasn't alone. She'd never be alone again. The Drakthar stood with her. Her friends in the colony supported her. And most importantly, she was speaking truth. That was all anyone could do. The day of the address arrived. Emily stood in a specially constructed transmission chamber, cameras and sensors surrounding her. She'd dressed simply, refusing the formal attire her handlers had suggested. She wore her lab coat, the one she'd been wearing the day she met Tharos. It was stained and patched, but it felt right. A reminder of who she'd been and who she still was at her core. The transmission activated. Suddenly she was standing in the Earth Assembly Hall, or at least her hologram was. Thousands of representatives filled the seats, and she knew millions more watched from around the globe. Her mouth went dry. Tharos appeared beside her. Not physically in the transmission chamber, but his presence manifested in the hologram. His massive form towered over the assembly, scales glowing with gentle light. The representatives gasped, many standing in shock or fear. Emily took a deep breath and started speaking. Her voice shook at first but grew stronger as she continued. My name is Emily Brooks. 6 months ago, I was a nobody. A student barely scraping by, working on a frontier colony because I couldn't afford anything better. I was invisible, unremarkable, the kind of person who gets lost in crowds. Then I met Tharos, and everything changed. She told them the story. All of it. Removing the spike from his paw, the gifts that followed, the bond that formed. The revelation about the Drakthar and the Void Swarm. The battle where humanity had to choose between pride and survival. The alliance that formed afterward. We've been alone in the galaxy for so long, Emily continued. Thinking we had to conquer or be conquered, dominate or be dominated. But that's not the only way. The Drakthar have shown us something different. Partnership. Mutual respect. The understanding that different species can work together and become stronger for it. She gestured to Tharos. This being could have ignored me. Could have killed me for approaching. Could have seen humans as beneath his notice. Instead, he chose to give humanity a chance. And that chance has given us access to technologies and knowledge that will transform everything. Not through theft or conquest, but through earned trust. The assembly was silent. Emily pressed on. The Void Swarm is coming. It's real, it's ancient, and it's destroyed civilizations far more advanced than ours. We can't fight it alone. We need the Drakthar. We need the freed Krell. We need anyone willing to stand against something that wants to enslave or destroy everything in its path. And that means letting go of the idea that humans have to be on top, that we have to dominate every relationship. She paused, feeling the weight of billions of eyes on her. I'm not special. I'm not chosen or destined or any of that nonsense. I'm just someone who saw a creature in pain and decided to help. That's it. That one moment of basic compassion changed everything. It proved to the Drakthar that humanity was worth saving, worth teaching, worth trusting. And if I can do that, so can anyone. Every person watching this has the same capacity for compassion, for cooperation, for choosing connection over conquest. Emily's voice grew passionate now, the nervousness burning away. This is humanity's chance to become something better. Not conquerors of the galaxy, but partners in it. Not alone and afraid, but connected to something larger than ourselves. The Void Swarm wants us to fight each other, to stay divided and weak. We can choose differently. We can choose to be the species that proved cooperation is stronger than slavery, that compassion is more powerful than conquest. She looked directly into the cameras, knowing people across Earth and throughout human colonies were watching. It started with one girl pulling a nail from a dragon's paw. It can continue with every single one of us choosing kindness over fear, understanding over prejudice, partnership over domination. That's how we survive. That's how we deserve to survive. And that's how we build a future worth living in. The transmission ended. Emily sagged, exhausted, not sure if she'd made any difference at all. Then her tablet started exploding with messages. Hundreds, then thousands, then millions. Support from ordinary people who'd heard her message and believed it. Offers from scientists wanting to join the Unity Accord. Requests from other colonies to establish diplomatic relations with the Drakthar. It wasn't universal acceptance. Plenty of people opposed everything she stood for, called her a traitor or a fool. But enough believed. Enough understood. Enough were willing to try. Emily Brooks, the nerdy girl who just wanted to study alien plants, had accidentally started a revolution. Not through violence or force, but through one simple act of compassion that proved humanity's greatest strength wasn't weapons or technology. It was the capacity to care for others, even when they're different, even when we're afraid. She looked at Theros, feeling the warmth of their bond, and smiled. This was just the beginning. The Void Swarm was still out there, and the real challenges lay ahead. But for the first time in human history, they wouldn't face those challenges alone. And that made all the difference. Retry.